Working in advertising, it's a great breeding ground for new businesses.
I mean, there is a lot of conversation about AI.
If I think about the conversations I've had with agency bosses, they tend to be more in the camp that you've described, which is bring it on. On its own, it's not much use. With humans, it's fantastic. I mean, I wasn't a public school boy, you can probably tell by looking at me or listening to me. The ads were pure escapism. It just seemed like Hollywood, really. I thought, I'll have some of that.
Welcome to this episode of Entrepreneurs in the Wild. Today, I'm over the moon to be joined by Paul Bainsfair, who is the Director General of the IPA. As you will know, having seen some of the other episodes, what we're trying to do with Entrepreneurs in the Wild is understand more about entrepreneurs, their journeys, and also ask the question, actually, is there an entrepreneur in all of us just waiting to get released into the wild? So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. We've worked together over the years a few times, and I always loved working with you. And
likewise, the feeling is mutual.
All right.
Yeah. We enjoy working together. It was fun.
If you wouldn't mind just explaining a little bit about your journey so far. Obviously, you've had loads of really big jobs in the industry. You've been an entrepreneur. You've had a successful startup. You've also had really important leadership roles in the big networks. And obviously now, for the last few years, you've been heading up, the ultimate trade body here in the UK, the IPA. So it'd be great just to hear a bit more about your journey so far.
The weird thing about me, I think it is weird because I've spoken to other people about this, and I'm the only person in this category. I wanted to get into advertising when I was quite young. I think like 14 or 15. I'm not quite sure why, other than I always loved the ads on TV when I was a kid. And at some stage, it must have dawned on me that there were jobs around making the ads happen. So this, and I'm, as I say, I'm getting on now. So in the late 60s, early 70s, the ads were pure escapism. It just seemed like Hollywood, really. I thought, I'll have some of that, And then as I got to sort of later on at school, when I was doing probably about to start my A-levels, we had a sort of careers guidance teacher whose job it was to try and point people in the right direction. And when I sat down with him, he said, "Do you have any idea what you want to do?" I said, "Yeah, I want to work in advertising." He was completely nonplussed because he'd never come across this before. I then discovered that there was one college in London, or just outside in Watford, that was renowned for its advertising course. But because there was only one, it was really difficult to get on this course. So I just, by various means, I won't go into the details, managed to get myself in front of the selection people, and I got on this course. And really, that was it. And after that, I started at J. Walter Thompson, which was then the biggest agency in the land. No longer exists in that name, of course. Yes. Part of the big now WPP group. But it was very much, I wasn't a public school boy, you can probably tell by looking at me or listening to me. And I felt when I got there, this place is exactly how I imagined advertising would be. It was full of guys in Savile Row suits, very, I would say very well spoken people. And it just felt very establishment. And I looked around and thought to myself, I can't see myself rising easily to the top here, because I was an ambitious little person. And it just so happened that a mate of mine had joined Saatchi Saatchi in its very early stages. And he and I were chatting over a bit, and he said, you've got to come around here. You've got to get into this place. It's completely different. And sure enough, I managed to get an interview and never looked back. It was a real meritocracy, anti-establishment. They were there, they were really iconoclastic. They were trying to tear things down and do things differently. And it just was so exciting. And of course, it was on a roll, it was winning business. And I kind of grabbed onto some tailcoats of people that were, doing stuff, and ended up there. I was there for 16 years and ended up as the managing director of the famous Charlotte Street office. I was asked whether I wanted to think about joining a couple of other guys in starting an agency. One of them was Dave Trott, who'd already been successful with Gogwini's Trott. And the other one was a guy I'd worked with called John Sharkey. And we decided to give it a go. And we formed Bainsfair Sharkey Trott. And that was in the beginning of the 90s. And more or less 10 years, grew it to be quite a big agency. Then we were made an offer we couldn't refuse by Omnicom, and it was rolled into what became TBWA, and then I became the European chairman of TBWA as a result of coming along for the ride. And then I met you. I left TBWA after about 6 or 7 years, I think, and decided that it'd be fun to do some work with you, and you wanted me to come in, and that was a great ride. And then the IPA job came up, and here I am. So that's it.
Yeah, that's an incredible journey. I'd love to sort of understand how it feels, because you've been an incredibly successful kind of professional in a kind of non-entrepreneurial environment, more of a corporate environment, more where you maybe you don't own it, and then you've also had your own business, your own startup with some people, and you've had a go at that, and obviously you felt the intensity of that. I'd just love to understand the difference. How does it feel to kind of move from one into the other, and then back to another setting?
Well, of course there are differences, and I'll talk about those, but there are also some similarities which I would refer to, and in my case there were two things I think that really encouraged me to think it would be worth going off and having a breakaway and being an entrepreneur, if you like. And the two main things were working in advertising. Just generally, you saw, it's a great breeding ground for new businesses to start, because people, for various reasons, they rise up to the near the top of the agency they're working in, and then something might happen that they didn't get a promotion, or someone comes in on top of them or something, and they think, fuck that. Are we allowed to swear? And they say, I'm not having that. And then they get a mate or two, and then they're off and they're on their own. So you see, working out, you see this happening over and over again almost, and you see a lot of people enjoying a lot of success. So it's only natural, I think, if you think you're half decent at what you're doing, you're kind of, you've got an eye on that, and you're thinking, well, maybe one day, maybe that'll be something I could do. So you've got that, and then in my case, working at Saatchi's, for anyone who's ever heard anything about how that place ran in the 80s, which was my sort of formative time there, it was very much a place that wasn't risk averse. It was, you were encouraged to take chances. You were encouraged to break rules. So although it was a big business in its own right, it was a business that had as a culture a sort of entrepreneurial streak. And they also had this thing where they divided, because it was a big agency by then, they divided the company into groups. And by that stage, I was the head of one of these groups. And you were like a baron within the organization, and you ran your group almost how you wanted to run it. So all these things fed into, I can sort of do this. I can see how if I were out on my own, the sort of stuff that I've learned and the environment and the culture I've been in would be helpful to me. So I think those two factors, seeing other people do it and being in a culture where you almost were doing it, but with a safety net, when events conspired to present the opportunity to me, it didn't seem such a big risk as it might have done had those things not been at play. But having said that, now when I look back, of course, it's very easy once you've done something, and you'll know yourself, once you've sort of gone through the highs and lows of trying to do it, and it's a success, it's quite easy to look back and think, well, that was good, that was easy. But there are times when you really are tested, and of course you have to give, if you're in as I was, a reasonably senior position, you have to give up quite a lot to do it. You've got golden handcuffs on. You're being paid well. You've got all the sorts of support systems that big companies give you. So to put that to one side and to go off on your own, even notwithstanding what I was saying about I think I could do it, it takes a bit of a leap of faith.
I've seen this in some of the other discussions about how with entrepreneurs, there's often an emotional trigger. And I think you described that perfectly well. And I can certainly identify that, when we were all at IMP and we broke away from IMP. And IMP, whilst not Saatchi and Saatchi, had some of the same characteristics, full of pace setters, very encouraging of pushing the boundaries. And I can also sort of see that quite often what happens is situations present themselves. You get this sort of cocktail of, an opportunity that's commercial, and then before you know it, You've become an entrepreneur, and it's like, how did this happen?
And it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
I mean, you're having those early conversations, and it's exciting.
Yeah.
And it's exciting because you haven't actually done it yet. And then suddenly it's happening around you, you know, and you think, Christ, you've got to cut your every orifice and go for it.
Yeah.
You know? So
and I sort of think that, you know, there are loads of people with loads of great ideas in the world, and there's just sometimes they just don't have that cocktail where it's often socially driven by, you know, a couple of other people, and then someone's resigned, and then someone's, you know, gone and had a word with the client, and then before you know it, you know, you've got a business, and then everyone then has to follow through.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a few times over the years, and I agree with you. I think that for most of us, if you're any good at what you do, there are sort of junctions in the road of your career where you have to turn right or turn left. You know, there's a moment when these events, as you say, conspire to present an opportunity, and you weigh it up, and some people don't do it because it's safer not to do it. And indeed, it might be the right decision not to do it because it might not. No one knows it's going to be a success. And other people do it. But I do think we've all got it in us a bit to do it, maybe some more than others. And also, of course, we've talked about the fact that we're very often, in our world, you don't do it on your own. So you've got, it's very important that the characters that you decide to go with are complementary and encouraging of what it is you're going to do, and you haven't got a sort of doomsayer in the group. So I think all those things do help. But yeah, you can't just do it. Well, I couldn't do it every year. You know, I think you've got to wait for those moments when it all just feels right. Yeah.
Yes. So if you sort of think about, you know, moving from leadership role at Saatchi's, founding your own business, growing it, successfully selling it, and then having a leadership role at TBW, were there any kind of things that you're taking forward into the next role that made you better at the next role because of what you learned from kind of the other situation?
Yes. I mean, in some ways, many things are quite prosaic. I mean, if you've been working for a good company, and I was lucky to work at, well, Saatchi's before I left to start my own business, you learn good habits. And they're good habits whether you're in your own business or you're in somebody else's business. Yeah. And I mentioned this structure that we had, which meant you were very much given leadership opportunities within Saatchi's. Because when you start a company, if you have any success, you're going to employ other people very quickly. Yeah. So you are thrust into a position of leadership. So having some sort of experience of that was very, very helpful. So quite a lot of what I had been doing in my job working for Saatchi's, I was able to apply to my new role in my, you know, as a managing partner of my own company. But there are other things that you're not trained in, particularly in our world, which of course you have to embrace with both hands and really get your head around. And of course, one of those things is the business of making money. Because although when you're running a big group for, say, a company like Saatchi's, you're very conscious of, you know, getting more business, winning, and all the rest of it, and that's all good. You're not really bothered about how much cash you've got in the bank and all the more sort of, how can I put it, that in many ways they're not exciting things, but without them the whole thing doesn't work. Yeah. So that I wasn't really that well prepared for that side of it, and I had to learn quite quickly. Although I was very lucky in that one of the three of us, my other partner John, was naturally very gifted at that side of things. So he sort of really put it on his shoulders more. Yeah. Although, of course, I'd like to think I didn't leave him alone in that regard. But I mean, I really did rely on him quite heavily. I mean, he'd read mathematics at university, so you know his sort of ability to sort of hoover up the numbers and understand it all very quickly was he had more of a gift at that than I did. So that was one thing that I had to learn.
I think one of the things I've noticed though is that like the really successful agency businesses, again, whether they're a startup and entrepreneurially led and independent still or not, and I think you were making this point really well earlier on, they do have the same sort of vibe, that pace setter culture, that pushing the boundaries, that, you know, ability to sort of deal with risk and encouragement of risk. When you look across the industry now, do you still see that?
Yes, I think it has changed, and one of the reasons it's changed, I think, is the sort of almost the supremacy of technology within our industry now over, shall we say, creativity. That's not to say that creativity isn't important, but if I do cast my mind back, it was a pretty straightforward world. You only had 6 or 7 different media that you could advertise on, and there definitely was more of a celebration of the importance of creative work. Most of the national newspapers, the broadsheets, used to have a column on advertising every week in the 80s. It seems ridiculous now, and they talk about agencies and campaigns that are just broken. So it was very much more of a celebrated, the creative part of it, industry. Now, what's changed, I think, is that the kind of, I'm not even getting onto AI and all of the stuff that's coming down the road now, but, the digitalization of our business has meant that a lot of the entrepreneurial people have stretched their legs, so to speak, in that world, rather than we've definitely seen a decline in creative agency startups. They still happen, and there have been some very successful ones recently, but they're not at the pace that they used to be at. So I would say that is a difference in the world I grew up in to the one that we're now working in.
There is a lot of conversation about AI. Some of that conversation is presenting AI as the end of the world sort of thing. So, oh, come on, cheer up. And some of it is like the opposite. It's like, of course, and actually it's been with us for a while, and it's now about what we do with it and how we use it. And there are people that are saying, well, actually, AI is a great thing for entrepreneurs because it's a real leveler. It gives entrepreneurs the ability to kind of cut through stuff that's more admin heavy and and concentrate on things that are more inspirational and innovative. And also there is a thing about AI where it removes scale as a barrier. And I just wondered if it's now sort of cropping up, when in your role in the IPA, and how is the industry seeing it, adopting it, thinking about it? Is it a sort of thing that is worrying everyone, or are people kind of embracing it?
Yes, we are talking about it a lot, and we're doing stuff around it, trying to understand it more. If I think about the conversations I've had with agency bosses, they tend to be more in the camp that you've described, which is bring it on. The fact of the matter is, there's a sense that good people are good people, and as things stand, and I underline as things stand, AI is on its own, it's not much use. With humans, it's fantastic. So it's like this is not my idea, someone said this to me and I thought it was brilliant. At the moment, here we are in early 2024, it's like an incredible intern. It's like having someone in your company that can do anything you wanted to do quicker than anyone's ever been able to do it. But it needs to be told what to do, and it needs to be checked because what you get back doesn't necessarily, isn't always quite right. So, but I say underline as it stands because the rate of development is such that one is starting to worry whether that will be in the long term the case. And I'm thinking now, coming back to creative agencies, there's a very interesting article in The Spectator this week about AI and how it's making strides in composing music. So how far are we away, I suppose, if I put my black hat on, how far are we away from not just, we can already write ads with AI, but ads that are really, really good and that really could create fame for brands and all the things that we like to think that we alone have been able to do up to now. So it's a long answer to your question, and I think the answer is no one really knows. But because advertising people are by and large quite optimistic and competitive and all the things that we've been talking about, they're sort of at the moment bringing it forward and saying let's do what we can with it. And of course there has been a growth in housing amongst big clients.
Yeah.
Now they're going to have extra powers with AI to do more in their AI sort of studios than they ever have been able to do before. So again, that puts some pressure on what agencies have been doing for them. So everywhere I look, I see opportunity. I also see threat. So I asked me in, I don't know, I won't say 5 years. Ask me in a bit longer than that, because who was it? Bill Gates who said we always overestimate what the next 5 years will bring and underestimate what the next 10 years will bring.
Yeah.
But I think it is a game changer. I really do.
I'm totally with you. I think that's a really good roundup of the opportunity and the risks. I think one of the things though about our industry is just the sort of the vibe, and you described it really well when you first felt yourself attracted to this thing called advertising. And I have to say, I recall that really clearly, myself, because I'm from the north, came down to London, saw all these people wearing nice clothes and being very confident and very sociable, and going out to lunch a lot, that sort of thing. And I thought, well, that's not a bad job, not bad. And I found myself attracted to the sort of vibe of it over and above what it actually did, or what it represented. So I just wonder if all this sort of thing around technology, and there'll be a whole new kind of wave of entrepreneurs and ideas that come as a result of it, what that means to the vibe, because it just feels like some of the sort of borders and boundaries, if you like, have started to sort of fade away over the years, linked to technology and outsourcing and all those sorts of things.
Yes, well, of course you're right. Part of my job is talking to people that are running agencies all the time. Yeah. So one of the most recent conversations I had was to do with, what's it like out there at the moment? Yeah. I was doing a bit of a review for the beginning of this year and trying to get a sense of how optimistic or concerned agency bosses were about what was lying ahead of them. And I got a long list of things they were worried about, starting with, what's happening in the Red Sea, Gaza, Ukraine, affecting supply lines, the cost of living crisis, inflation, clients looking for ways of, reducing the costs even further, unbelievable competition amongst agencies, and they feel they're less able to use their creative powers as a differentiator. Yes. So they're feeling they're in a more of a commodity game. Anyway, I got this long, long list, and one guy in particular, I won't say it was, but he went through this list, and I was like, oh. And then at the end he said, but we moan all the time, but it's still paradise. And I think he was grasping at what you're saying, which is it still is a great job, and it still is fun, and the people that you meet and the ambition and the excitement they have for what they're doing is still there. So I'm not too glum about that leaving our industry, but it's definitely eroded a bit from the halcyon days I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, and I think it kind of sharpens the mind a little bit around what our roles are as leaders, and what we want, what's the sort of positive change we want to affect. Really, we sort of want to top up that vibe. Obviously, we just talked a little bit about AI. It's obviously not about that really at all. There's a whole sequence of events that have led us here. COVID, cost issues, the shift to working from home, and Zoom lifestyle, the Great Resignation. But it's more like a sort of sequence of events, isn't it, that sort of creates a sense of sort of doom and gloom. And it's not. I don't think it's only in our industry. I think it's a sort of a culture-wide thing, and not only just UK. Although I feel
without getting too sort of political about things, I think the whole. Pretty much the whole of the sort of Western world is in a bit of a grip of what's gone wrong. We're the generation behind us are the first generation that are probably are going to be worse off than their parents, by and large. Yeah. And that's never happened before. Yeah. So there is this sense of torpor, or a sense of not going forward anymore. Yeah. And it's creating a bit of a crisis of confidence, I think, that all of the individual factors we've talked about contribute to. But, it's very easy to get, depressed about the whole situation. But I often say to people working in our industry, one of the things that you should always remind yourself of is that unlike some of the big industries that we work for, let's take soft drinks industry, there's like 4 players, So if their market goes down, they all go down. But we're so fractured in terms of how many agencies and businesses there are in our world. It's quite possible, even if the top line is not going anywhere, for you to be a small player that's doubling your business every year because you found a way of differentiating yourself, or selling something that nobody else is selling. So you can still make great success and move forward very quickly because we're lucky enough to be in a fragmented marketplace. Yeah. So I say this, and I see some people are actually doing it. So it's not all grim.
Yeah, totally. And also I think it means that, I mean, this is the thing about entrepreneurial spirit. It's like determination and competitiveness, that unreasonable pursuit of opportunity. I think it will no doubt, lead to a resurgence sooner or later.
Oh, I agree. I think that's good. And also because we do attract, and we still do, attract very talented, often charismatic people that the clients who go into agencies looking for work are themselves attracted to and want to surround themselves by. So I think that, being able to attract people of that caliber remains a very important. I mean, I take it very seriously in my role at the IPA, and we're doing everything we can to try and encourage bright young people to come into our business, because we've become less competitive than we used to be in terms of the salaries that we're able to pay. And also technology has become slightly more glossy than advertising, although advertising still is considered, quite a glamorous job to go and do. So, getting those bright young people in at the ground floor remains a really important part of the.
So you're seeing any changes then in terms of where people are coming from when they enter the industry?
Yes, I am. These are not transformational changes, but they're, the old days of the what you might call the blue chip agency brands doing the milk round at the top universities and taking 6 graduates, a couple from Oxbridge, someone from Durham, that sort of thing. That's definitely declined. They still do take, classically educated, very bright people, but they're putting much more effort into diversification generally at all levels. A lot of them have apprentice schemes to get people in as school leavers. And this seems very brave and new worldy, but back in the late 60s, even before I got into the business, it was quite normal for, because we had a different kind of office where we had people working in dispatch and, production runners and all sorts of kids coming in. Half the rock and roll stars of the 60s had their first jobs in advertising agencies because they could draw, So and a lot of these people went on to become agency bosses. So getting people in from, should we say, less traditional backgrounds. We've tried it already, and it's so people like Saatchi Saatchi didn't go to university. Tim Bell didn't go to university. Frank Lowe didn't go to university. These are great hallowed names in our industry, and they all came in at a low level into their agency worlds.
I love the idea of these sort of motivated, charismatic, lateral thinkers who are just really up for it. And one of the things I've also noticed, though, is that agencies are a bit more reluctant to embrace people like that. We've all gone a bit careful when it comes to just giving people a go at things, and I think it's because the industry's professionalised. I think over the years, which is overall a good thing, but part of that journey, I think, is we have sort of lost that sort of interest in some weird and wonderful.
It's a sort of an inevitability, as you say, of becoming more professional, and like all businesses, there's more focus put on not making mistakes than on making a big leap. I mean, funny enough, this is very relevant to what we were saying, because I've got to go. I'm on this Speakers for Schools program. I don't know if you know about it, where lots of people give up some time to go into schools that don't normally get people from outside the education world to come in and talk about what they might do when they leave school. So I'm going to do a talk quite soon, and I was looking around for a good ad that might engage some sixth formers, and I found I don't know if you've seen it's called. You're not from Skipton, I know.
I'm not from Skipton. I'm Buxton.
Buxton. That's what I was thinking of.
But more North Midlands.
Oh, okay. But there's a very funny ad. It's called Skipton Alfie, and I don't know if you've seen it, by Yorkshire Tea.
Oh, right.
And the whole thing is about a young lad going on his first holiday to Ibiza with his mates, packing tea bags in his suitcase. It's all set to a sort of cool track. And it's hilarious. It's very funny because there's a sort of vague connection with how he's hiding all these tea bags with going through customs. The reason I'm telling this story is I thought, well, I better find out some more about this ad, because I'll show this ad to the kids and say, this is a bit of advertising you might find interesting. How did it come about? So I thought I'd dig a bit deeper. Anyway, I discovered that Yorkshire Tea not just because of this ad, but for what they've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years. They've gone from number 3 in the market to number 1. A lot of people saying it's down to their marketing director, who has not classically trained and was a local journalist who was getting a bit bored, not earning any money, saw an ad from Yorkshire Tea saying, can someone be our social manager? This is 6 or 7 years ago. Didn't even know what it was, went in. And he's an amazing guy. He just buys this work all the time that's busting the category. And so people that come from outside of the norm are much more able to do things differently because they don't know any better almost. And often it can have fantastic results. So yes, I think we've got to get those sorts of people into the business.
We had a load of students in last week at Iris, probably 50 students. We got them working on briefs because I think that's the thing that matters the most. It's not just about talking to them in theory about what the industry is or does or how it works. It's, go on then.
Have a go.
See what you got. And there were 2 or 3 people that just really stood out. And there's like a load of ideas on a leading alcohol brand that we have then taken to the client, because what happens is when you get people sort of being a person in a different era, so to speak, they just see things differently, and they don't have some of the conditioning and prejudices that we have. So it's like, let's just do more of that. And again, it's like unlocking that entrepreneurial spirit can be as simple as let's just try some stuff, and maybe it'll be uncomfortable, but maybe it'll be really good.
That's exactly an example that meets the sort of description I had, which was people that haven't been told how to do something, who've got talent, they will do things differently. And that, as we know, that is 9/10 of it. Just having something, it has to be relevant, but it's not been done before. It's different. Everyone loves it. So, it was great to hear that. Yeah.
So just want to spend a bit of time just talking about entrepreneurs that you've worked with. So I've always felt that really good agency businesses have got loads of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurially minded people in it. They're people that are go-getters. They're competitive. They've got edge. They're often they're charismatic. Often they're unreasonable. They'll defend ideas. And I'm just wondering, if you think about your Saatchi career, your Bainsfair Sharky Truck, and also your career at Iris, whether or not you've worked with people who are entrepreneurs and entrepreneurially minded people, and what are the sort of challenges and or indeed great kind of moments that have come from dealing with those people over the years?
Yes, I mean, almost too many to mention. I mean, if I go back to Saatchi's, I mean, they were entrepreneurs because, of course, they started that company. Very different brothers. Charlie was a sort of brooding, almost like head of a crime family figure. I mean, you just wanted his approval. He'd be brooding in his sort of office. He wouldn't necessarily be around the place that much. In fact, famously, he didn't like meeting clients. And on one occasion, he was checking the work we were about to show. The receptionist had made the mistake of bringing the client into the presentation room before Charlie had got out. So he was in there, and the clients come shuffling in. This was before he was a well-known figure. Anyway, he just took a handkerchief out of his pocket and started just polishing the desk and pretended he was a cleaner. and sort of left him rather than, and yet here was this guy that was the head of the company, So he had a very sort of focusing on the work. He was all about the work. And then he got his younger brother, who was much more charming, urbane, had a first-class degree from the London School of Economics, and really understood all the business language that the clients were using. And he provided that side of things. So the first thing that struck me about that was that there were different kinds of entrepreneurs. You could be more classically sort of trained and approach things in a orthodox way, Morris, or you could be this brooding genius, Charlie. So that was that. And I think also Tim Bell, who sadly died a few years ago, who was he often described himself as the ampersand between Saatchi and Saatchi. He just was the most charming, charismatic person I've ever been. And, he'd have anyone eating out of his hands, whoever it was, in seconds. So you learn the importance of that side, personality, and actually, how clients respond well to people that have that ability. So that was a big part of my learning, I think. And then I suppose also when I went off on my own, I realized that it was often the case that you had to cast people when you were going for certain pieces of business in a way that I'd never really thought about before, because you could read what kind of approach. So you might have a client that was really into big visionary ideas, get a charismatic person in, or you might have a client that was really interested in the numbers, get someone in who was much more, drilled down on all that kind of stuff. So, you learn that it's horses for courses, and there's not just one size that fits all. I think you also learn, and this, I was very impressed when I came to work with you guys, and you were the best example of this I've found. Entrepreneurs, generally speaking, they're not work shy. They're hard, they're hardworking, and they don't. You hear people say things like, "You got to get your work-life balance right." I think entrepreneurs don't understand that question because it's all life.
Yeah.
To an entrepreneur, it's not like I just want to be at work all the time, but everything they do is life. So you don't have this, well, I'll finish work for today now, I'm going to go and put my feet up and watch TV, because they are just not like that. They're not built like that. And I think that often gives them the advantage over the people they're competing with, who are working for other people, might be equally talented, but it's not their business and it's not their thing. However driven they think they are, it's a different level when it's your company, and you've got heads to feed. You've got people depending on you to pay their mortgage at the end of the month. That just changes the whole thing. So there's not one thing, I suppose what I'm saying is, but you realize that there are quite a lot of personality traits, there are characteristics, there are things that successful entrepreneurs do have in common, but they also can be completely different.
Just reflecting back on your incredible career, are there any sort of things you wish you'd knew before? And are there any kind of big mistakes that may well have been avoided had you known what you know now?
Wow, that's a difficult question to answer, because there are loads of things I wish I'd known, but you do learn them on the job. So it's quite hard to put yourself back into a position where you think, well, what didn't I know when I started that I wish I'd known? But there is one thing I think that's come to me, and that is that I wish I had known that when I started, as I learned, the more I did it, that things aren't going to go wrong. Things are definitely going to go wrong, and how you deal with them is so important, and not overreacting and realizing that everyone's doing their best, and that in this world we work in life generally, you get over these things, and once you accept that, you become a much better leader, because I think it's a bit like if the captain of the plane is walking down saying hello to the passengers, and there's a bit of turbulence, everyone looks at him, and if he looks calm and relaxed, everyone's calm and relaxed. If he looks like, what the fuck was that? You're going to. So I think you've got to be that captain, the first captain. So when things do go wrong, you've got to be calm. Everything's going to be okay, and show you're confident. And I think I did learn that, but I don't think I knew that. I think the first, maybe the first year, I was a bit more, mercurial, shall we say, than I became later. So I would say that's the one thing I would give as advice to anyone starting an agency: accept that things are going to go wrong. Don't worry about it. Get on with it.
That's fantastic, because and I remember when we worked together, I got an awful lot out of your experiences and your perspectives, and I remember really clearly we were having a conversation about something had gone quite badly wrong, and you said, look, if you think what you're seeing is true, and you think it's that bad, you have to act. You said that to me, and I thought, yes I do. Piled in, and also I also remember really clearly, the whole sort of time we worked together, and you made everything more enjoyable, and I think you helped us understand more around, but you got to make time to smell the roses, and sort of representing what we do as it's like a caper, and it's like being in a kind of Guy Ritchie movie where you sort of move from one sort of thing to another, and everything is more like an adventure, and it helps to when you sort of gamify what you do as a sort of hardworking northerner who a bit bit too honest, it helps you sort of, reimagine yourself so that, you can enjoy it, but also you can make that infectious and enjoyable for the people.
It's very kind of you to say that. I think, again, I mean, I learned most of what I did learn in those first years at Saatchi's, and there was this celebratory culture as well as all the other things I talked about. So barely a week went by that we weren't drinking champagne in reception because something had happened. It could be the tiniest win or the biggest win, and didn't matter. We were out, we were having a good time, and you just wanted to do something that was celebrated in that way. So it just creates a successful aura around the place. So I do agree with that. I think recognizing that, as you said, it's one scene moving to another scene, and hopefully we're going to win, and it's going to be a laugh. That's a good place to be.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being part of my journey too. And you've made a massive difference. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Entrepreneurs in the Wild. Tune in next time, and look out for the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you.